This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to update and upgrade our Zaxara the Exemplary EDH deck. Thank you for joining us for another installment of the Up and Up series. Today we're updating and upgrading Zaxara the Exemplary. In the description of this video, you'll find links to this build's deck tech, the up-to-the-moment deck list, and the video primer series. We've got 5 cards going in and 5 cards coming out, although the first 3 cards are going to be explained all together. So let's dig those first 3 cards out. I'm going to lay them right there. The first 3 cards going into the 99 are snow-covered lands, one each of our basic colors, of course, green, black, and blue. So, very quickly, well, not very quickly, there's going to be a little bit of an explanation. These 3 snow-covered lands are going in to replace 3 basics, non-snow lands. So, prior to this switch, we had 2 forests, 2 basic forests, 2 basic swamps, and 2 basic islands. So now what we're doing is we're going to take one each of those 2, replacing them with a snow-covered forest, swamp, and island. This is going to turn our land base into a singleton land base. So now the entire deck is singleton. Does it matter? No. Are we still going to have any, are we going to create any concerns in getting the lands that we need into play? No. Anything that could have fetched for a basic forest, swamp, or island is still going to be able to fetch for a snow-covered forest, snow-covered swamp, and snow-covered island. What this change is doing now is laying the framework for an eventual, I don't know when, but it's going to happen at some point. I just need a copy to become available. At some point in time in the future, this deck is going to welcome with arms wide open a copy of Field of the Dead. And when we do that, we will have a side token creating ability because, of course, when Field of the Dead comes into play, as long as we have, it's going to come into play and then it's going to do what it does as long as we have more than 6 lands that have different names, and we're going to be able to create some 2/2 black zombies. That's not going to change what we're doing in this deck. This is still an X-Spell dedicated build, but it's not a bad thing to have a little side token creation just from playing lands. And of course, by getting rid of a forest, swamp, and island and replacing them with a snow-covered forest, snow-covered swamp, and snow-covered island, that allows us to have more lands with different names, which allows Field of the Dead to be triggered more often, in addition to being able to go online by having the number of lands with different names on our side of the battlefield. Field of the Dead is not going into the 99 of this deck today. That is something that's going to take place in the future. When? I don't know. Copies are not cheap. We're looking for a nice reprint, or we're looking for cards to become available from one of the other decks that may, for some reason, no longer need it. But the framework is being laid down. 3 basics out, 3 snow basics in. And just like that, 60% of our changes are done for this video. Let's move on to card number 4 going into the 99. And that is, oh yes, Stargaze. Here's that X spell right there, baby. X and 2 black. We look at twice X cards from the top of our library. We put X cards from among them into our hand. And then we put the rest into our graveyard and we lose X life. So let's take a look at this for a moment here. Let's just say, for the purposes of rounding, a nice little number, let's just say X is 10. We pumped in 10 mana into X, 12 mana overall. We're going to look at the top 20 cards of our library. We're going to get to sift through those 20 cards, picking the 10 best cards that we want. We're going to put them into our hand. We're going to put the rest into our graveyard, and we're going to lose 10 life. So we're going to do what Black loves to do, pay 1 life per card, but we get to pick and choose. That is amazing to me, and I have to be honest, it is very surprising that this card is just an uncommon. We get to look at twice X and decide which cards go into our hand and which cards go into our graveyard. This is not a graveyard deck, but I can see this card being wonderful in graveyard themes because you get to pick and choose. Yes, you're paying the 1 life per card, which is what black does, but this is just an uncommon. Very, very surprising to me. So this is getting slam dunked into the 99 of this Zaxara deck, because this will allow us to filter the top 2X cards, put half of them into our hand, the ones that we want the most, and then dump the rest. We don't worry about losing the life. We have plenty of ways to gain life. This is just going to be an amazing... and I'm pretty sure that Stargaze is going to end up being one of the top 10 cards of this deck, and probably the top card advantage card that we have in this build. You heard me. Stargaze. That's going in, and that is going to replace Thassa's Intervention. So here what we're doing is we're taking one X2 spell and replacing it with another X2 spell. Yes, Thassa's Intervention is an instant, and it's not a sorcery like Stargaze. But what are we losing with Thassa's Intervention? All right, we look at the top X cards of our library, and we can take 2 of them and put them into our hand. We're only looking at X, and we only get 2. Yes, it's an instant speed, so we can end of turn this. But with the mana that we can generate in this deck with Stargaze in our hand, we look at twice X and get half of those cards. And of course, Thassa's Intervention, other mode is we can counter target spell unless its controller pays X. We're not really interested in counter magic. We're more interested in putting cards in our hand. And Stargaze absolutely just wallops Thassa's Intervention in my mind. This build, like I said, generates so much mana that we could put a healthy number into X with Stargaze during our turn and still have enough mana to cast other spells. This is one of the easiest swaps I've ever made. Stargaze in, Thassa's Intervention out. I'm telling you, Stargaze all day, all night. All right. The last card going in is not going to cause a problem for the MTG BC and Zaxara fans out there. The card that it's replacing, it most likely will, but I'm going to explain my reasoning for that, and it's more personalized than it is functional. So the card going into the 99, that's going to be Stocking the Pantry, another uncommon card which really I think could probably be a rare. It's 1 green mana for this enchantment. Whenever we put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature we control, we put a supply counter on Stocking the Pantry. We can pay 2 generic mana to remove a supply counter from Stocking the Pantry to draw a card. So this isn't exactly as well as this isn't... Let me try this again. This isn't as proportionate as it is with black, where, you're paying the mana, you're paying 1 life, you're drawing a card. Here, we're paying 2 mana, and we're going to end up with a card by removing a supply counter. However, with the number of times we're going to put +1/+1 counters on a creature, note, it says when we put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, it doesn't say on 1 or more creatures. So each one time that we put counters on a creature, for that creature, we're going to put a supply counter on Stocking the Pantry. If we put counters on 4 creatures, we're going to put 4 supply counters on Stocking the Pantry. And we're going to have the mana available to pay 2 to remove a supply counter and draw a card. This is a very low cost enchantment that's just going to sit on the battlefield and gain peripheral benefits from what this deck does, which is throw around +1/+1 counters like nobody's business. That's what Zaxara does. So for 1 green mana, we'll let that sit on the battlefield, Stocking the Pantry, let it collect dust, let it collect supply counters, and before you know it, we're going to raid the pantry and we're going to stock our hand. So Stocking the Pantry, that's not the problem. The card that it's replacing, that might cause a bit of an uproar. Stocking the Pantry's going in, and it's going to replace Rhystic Study. Now, before you start screaming at me in the comment section, we all know what Rhystic Study does. It is a staple. If you're playing with blue in a commander deck, most likely one of the first cards that's going in is a Rhystic Study. That's the problem. Rhystic Study is not a cheap card. I don't plan on going and buying copies of this card to put into other decks. That's where the personal decision of this swap enters. And I'm not recommending that if you don't need to take out a Rhystic Study, or if you have a plethora of Rhystic Studies, leave it in your Zaxara deck. For me, I am building other decks. I am building decks where card draw is not as plentiful as it is in this Zaxara build, particularly because of the 2 cards we just added with Stocking the Pantry and with Stargaze. So my thought process is I'm not going to pay the exorbitant amount to buy a copy of this. If it gets reprinted in the future and the prices go down, okay, then I'll make some considerations. But I do not want to invest those kinds of resources into this card, where I can just take it out of a deck that is already ridiculously strong in card draw and add it into a deck where the card draw is a bit weaker and is needed more. Basically, Rhystic Study doesn't need this deck. Let me say this in a different way. Zaxara doesn't need Rhystic Study as much as Rhystic Study could gain value in a different deck. That is the primary goal of this swap. I'm not telling you to take Rhystic Study out of your Zaxara deck. If you can keep it in there, do it. For me, right now, it's better served in a different deck, and if sometime in the future more copies of Rhystic Study become available that I know what to do with, I don't know how, there needs to be a reprint or 2 before that can happen, then you'll see this deck back in the Up and Up series with Rhystic Study getting crammed somewhere into the 99. Until then, Stocking the Pantry in, Rhystic Study out. You let me know about these changes, MTGBC, if you haven't already, in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.